I used to think the ultimate tragedy was loving someone who didn't love you back. I was wrong. The real tragedy is waking up in a sterile hospital room, a bandage wrapped around your skull, only to discover that you were the villain in your own life story. I had forced a man into a suffocating, loveless marriage through pure blackmail. When the amnesia wiped away my toxic obsession, I saw the monster I'd been. So, I did the only decent thing left. I handed him divorce papers and apologized. I expected relief. Instead, his eyes went pitch black, his jaw clenched, and he snarled, "You don't get to burn my world down and just walk away." The first thing I registered was the rhythmic, relentless beeping of a heart monitor. It was a cold, sharp sound that seemed to pierce right through the fog in my brain. I tried to open my eyes, but the harsh fluorescent lights of the hospital room sent a spike of agony straight behind my retinas. "Mrs. Harrison? Chloe? Can you hear me?" A voice, calm and clinical, broke through the ringing in my ears. I forced my eyelids open, blinking against the glare. A middle-aged man in a white coat was leaning over me, holding a penlight. His name tag read Dr. Eris Mercer. Where? My voice was nothing but a dry, cracked whisper. My throat felt like it was lined with sandpaper. "You're in St. Jude's Medical Center," Dr. Mercer said gently, checking my pulse. "You were in a severe car accident on the Pacific Coast Highway. You've been in a medically induced coma for 4 days to let the swelling in your brain subside. Do you know your name?" "Chloe," I croaked. "My name is Chloe." "Good. And your last name?" A terrifying blankness washed over me. I reached into the depths of my mind, grasping for something, anything. I saw fragments of a luxurious house, the cold, crashing waves of the ocean, a flash of blinding headlights, but no last name. No family faces, just an overwhelming, crushing sense of isolation. I don't know. Panic began to flutter in my chest. Dr. Mercer sighed softly, making a note on his clipboard. "Retrograde amnesia. It's not uncommon with the type of blunt force trauma you sustained. Your name is Chloe Harrison. You are 26 years old. Your husband is on his way." My husband. The words felt entirely alien to me. Over the next 48 hours, the hospital room became a revolving door of people I supposedly knew but couldn't recognize. There was my father, Arthur Sterling, a booming, intimidating man who smelled of expensive cigars and scotch. He didn't ask how I was feeling. He asked the doctor when I could attend a shareholder meeting. Then came Beatrice, an older woman with kind, tear-filled eyes who introduced herself as my housekeeper. It was Beatrice who inadvertently gave me the first puzzle pieces of my shattered identity. "I brought your things, ma'am," she had said, unpacking a designer overnight bag with trembling hands. "And I brought your journal. You always told me to grab it if anything ever happened. You said no one else could ever see it." When I was finally left alone, I cracked open the leather-bound book. What I read inside didn't just shock me, it made me physically nauseous. Page after page, entry after entry, detailed the thoughts of a spoiled, vindictive, deeply insecure woman. I read about how I had become obsessed with a man named Dominic Harrison. Dominic was the CEO of a rival tech firm that had hit a catastrophic financial rough patch. According to my own frantic, looping handwriting, my father and I had cornered him. We bought up his debt. We threatened to bankrupt his family, destroy his legacy, and leave his younger sister without the medical care she needed. The condition for our financial bailout? Dominic had to marry me. He looked at me with pure hatred today at the altar. An entry from 2 years ago read, "But I don't care. He's mine. He belongs to me. I will make him love me, even if I have to break him first." I dropped the journal onto the hospital bed, trembling. I was a monster. I had weaponized my family's wealth to buy a human being because of some twisted, unrequited obsession. The woman in this diary was cruel, manipulative, and deeply unhappy. Every page was stained with jealousy, detailing my paranoia about Dominic's former colleague, a woman named Sienna, whom he had actually loved before I forced his hand. I closed my eyes, a tear slipping down my cheek. I didn't feel like that woman. My mind was a blank slate, and without the poisonous cocktail of jealousy and entitlement that had seemingly fueled my past, all I felt was overwhelming guilt. I had ruined a man's life. The door to my private suite clicked open. I expected another nurse, but the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. I opened my eyes and saw him, Dominic Harrison. He was strikingly handsome, but his features were carved from ice. He wore a charcoal, tailored suit that looked perfectly pressed, though the dark circles under his deep-set gray eyes betrayed profound exhaustion. He stood at the foot of my bed, staring at me with a mixture of obligation and barely concealed contempt. So, Dominic's voice was a low, resonant baritone that sent a shiver down my spine. "The doctor says you've forgotten everything. Is this a new game, Chloe? Because I have a board meeting in an hour, and I don't have the patience for your theatrics today." I stared at the man I had apparently terrorized for 2 years. There was no warmth in his gaze, no relief that his wife had survived a near-fatal crash. There was only a weary, defensive wall built of stone. The diary hadn't exaggerated. He hated me, and frankly, looking at the situation objectively, I couldn't blame him. "It's not a game," I said quietly, my voice steady despite the rapid beating of my heart. "I genuinely don't remember you, or us, or anything really." Dominic scoffed, a harsh, bitter sound. He walked over to the window, refusing to look at me, staring out at the Los Angeles skyline. "Convenient. You drive your car off the PCH after throwing a fit because I refused to fire Sienna, and now you wake up with a clean slate. You get to play the victim. So that was what caused the crash." A jealous rage. I felt a hot flush of shame crawl up my neck. "Dominic." I said his name tentatively, testing the syllables on my tongue. He flinched slightly, as if the sound of his name in my mouth was offensive. I asked Beatrice to bring me my things. She brought my journal. He turned his head slightly, his profile sharp against the window's light, and I read it. I pulled my knees up to my chest, suddenly feeling very small in the large hospital bed. I read about what my father and I did to you, the debt, the blackmail, the forced marriage. Dominic turned fully around now, his gray eyes narrowing in deep suspicion. He crossed his arms over his chest. "I don't know what angle you're playing, Chloe. Usually, you deny the blackmail. Usually, you tell me I should be grateful you saved my company. I'm not playing an angle." I took a deep breath, the scent of antiseptic filling my lungs. I looked him dead in the eye. "I am horrified. I don't recognize the woman who wrote those things, but I know she is me. I know I did those things to you, and I am so profoundly, deeply sorry." Silence stretched between us, thick and heavy. The heart monitor beeped steadily. Dominic just stared at me, searching my face for the lie, the smirk, the hidden trap. When he didn't find one, his brow furrowed. "Sorry?" he echoed, the word sounding foreign to him. "You're sorry." "Yes," I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. "I stole 2 years of your life. I held your family's well-being over your head to force you into a cage. It was sick, it was abusive, and I want to make it right." I reached over to the bedside table. Earlier that morning, I had asked Mr. Finch, my father's exasperated corporate lawyer, to draft a specific document under the guise of updating my estate. I picked up the manila folder and held it out to him. Dominic didn't move. He looked at the folder as if it were a venomous snake. "What is that?" "It's a divorce petition," I said softly. "I've already signed it. I'm relinquishing any claim to your company's shares. I'm taking over the debt my father holds against you. I'll figure out a way to cancel it or pay him off myself. You are free, Dominic. You can go back to your life. You can go back to Sienna." For a moment, Dominic just looked at the folder, then at my face. I expected him to snatch it. I expected him to breathe a sigh of relief, to finally smile, to walk out of the hospital and never look back. Instead, a dark, turbulent storm brewed in his gray eyes. He stepped away from the window, closing the distance between us in 3 long, predatory strides. He didn't take the folder. He leaned over the bed, his hands gripping the metal rails beside my waist, trapping me in his shadow. "Do you think I'm a fool, Chloe?" he whispered, his voice vibrating with a sudden, terrifying intensity. "No, You think you can just push a button and erase the last 2 years?" He interrupted, his face inches from mine. I could smell his cologne now, cedarwood and rain. "You spent 24 months making sure I was completely dependent on your family's infrastructure. You alienated my investors, tied my company's supply lines to your father's shipping ports, and made sure that if I ever tried to leave, everything I built would burn to the ground. I didn't know the business details," I stammered, shrinking back into the pillows. "But I'll undo it, I promise. Just take the papers." Dominic let out a low, guttural snarl. It wasn't human. It was the sound of a cornered animal finally snapping. He grabbed the manila folder from my hand. For a split second, I thought he was going to sign it. Instead, he ripped it in half, then in half again. He threw the torn pieces of paper over my bed, letting them flutter down like morbid confetti. "You don't get it, do you?" he growled, his jaw tight with fury. "You don't get to trap me in a burning house, lock the doors, and then suddenly claim you found religion and walk away. You don't get to force me to give up the woman I loved, ruin my reputation, isolate me from my family, and then toss me aside when you get bored because you got hit in the head. I'm trying to set you free," I yelled back, tears springing to my eyes. "Why are you angry that I'm giving you what you want?" "Because I don't trust you," he roared, the sound echoing off the sterile walls. He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a dangerous, lethal whisper. "This is just another one of your manipulations. You want to see if I'll take the bait, so your father can pull the plug on my sister's medical trust. Well, it's not going to work, wife. You wanted this marriage. You fought tooth and nail for it. And now? You're going to stay in it until I say we are done." With that, he turned on his heel and stormed out of the hospital room, the heavy door slamming shut behind him with a deafening crack. My discharge from the hospital a week later was a muted, somber affair. I wore clothes that Beatrice had brought me, an absurdly expensive cashmere lounge set that felt too soft, too luxurious for a woman who had ruined a man's life. Dominic didn't come to pick me up. He sent his driver, a stoic man named Thomas, who barely made eye contact with me through the rearview mirror. The drive up to the Hollywood Hills was a blur of winding roads and towering gates. When we pulled up to the Harrison estate, my breath hitched. It was a sprawling, ultra-modern glass and steel mansion that overlooked the entire city. It was breathtakingly beautiful, but as I stepped through the massive front doors, a distinct chill settled into my bones. The house was immaculate, perfectly curated, and utterly devoid of warmth. It didn't feel like a home, it felt like a museum, or a high-security prison. Beatrice was waiting in the foyer. "Welcome home, Mrs. Harrison," she said, taking my coat. "I've prepared your room. The master suite is just up the stairs." Does he sleep in the master suite?" I asked tentatively. Beatrice gave me a sympathetic look. "Mr. Harrison has resided in the East Wing guest suite for the past 18 months, ma'am, ever since the incident after the honeymoon." I nodded, swallowing the shame that was becoming a permanent fixture in my throat. "Thank you, Beatrice. Can you just point me to the library? I'd like to read." I spent my first 3 days at the house in almost complete isolation. I pored over documents, old emails on my laptop, and financial records. The more I dug into Chloe Sterling's past actions, the more nauseated I became. Dominic had been right. The divorce papers I offered him at the hospital were practically useless. My father had structured the merger in such a way that if Dominic and I divorced, the Harrison Company would be immediately liquidated to cover breach of contract penalties. I hadn't just chained Dominic to me, I had swallowed the key. To free him, I couldn't just walk away. I had to systematically dismantle the financial traps my father and I had set. I started taking notes, drafting a quiet, secret plan to emancipate Dominic's assets without alerting my father. It was on the afternoon of my 4th day home that the doorbell rang. I was sitting in the conservatory, a cup of chamomile tea in my hands, when I heard the sharp, authoritative click of high heels on the marble floor. "I don't need to be announced, Beatrice. I'm expected," a woman's voice drifted in. A moment later, she walked into the conservatory. She was stunning, tall, with long, dark hair swept over one shoulder, wearing a sharp pencil skirt and a silk blouse. She had an air of effortless competence and elegance. I didn't need a memory to know who this was. Sienna Croft. She stopped in the doorway, crossing her arms, her dark eyes sweeping over me with a mixture of pity and disgust. "I heard about the accident," Sienna said, her tone devoid of any actual sympathy. "I also heard about the amnesia. Quite the convenient narrative, Chloe. Dominic tells me you even tried to hand him fake divorce papers." "They weren't fake," I said calmly, setting my teacup down, "but I realize now they were legally insufficient. I'm working on fixing that." Sienna let out a dry, mocking laugh. "Working on fixing it, right. Just like you worked on fixing the supply chain issues you created to force him to the altar? Look, Chloe, I don't care if your brain is scrambled or if this is another one of your psychotic mind games. I came here to drop off these quarterly reports for Dominic and to tell you to your face. You can't hold him forever. He is miserable with you. Every time he looks at you, he sees a warden, not a wife." The words stung, wrapping around my chest like a tight band, but I didn't fight back. I couldn't. She was right. "I agree with you," I said softly. Sienna blinked, her haughty expression faltering. "Excuse me?" I said. "I agree with you." I stood up, smoothing down my dress. "You love him, don't you? And he loved you. I took that from both of you because I was a deeply unwell, selfish person. I am currently trying to untangle his company from my father's holdings. As soon as his sister's medical trust is secure and his assets are protected, I am leaving. You can have him, Sienna. You should have had him all along." Sienna stared at me, completely speechless. The venom had been drained from her sails, replaced by profound confusion. "What kind of trick is this?" "It's not a trick," a dark, dangerous voice echoed from the hallway. We both jumped. Dominic stepped out of the shadows of the corridor, his eyes fixed intensely on me. He had taken off his suit jacket, his tie loosened, looking dangerous and unpredictable. How much of that had he heard? "Dominic," Sienna breathed, her entire demeanor softening as she looked at him. She took a step toward him. "I brought the reports, and I was just talking to your wife." Dominic didn't look at Sienna. His eyes, stormy, dark, and turbulent, remained locked onto my face. The sheer intensity of his stare made me want to shrink back into my chair. "Thank you for the reports, Sienna," Dominic said, his voice terrifyingly calm. "You can leave now." Sienna froze. "Leave? But we were supposed to go over the projections for the new tech rollout." I said, "You can leave," Dominic repeated, his tone brooking no argument. He finally spared her a glance, but it was cold, professional. My wife is still recovering from a traumatic brain injury. She shouldn't be stressed by uninvited guests in her home. "Her home?" I stared at him, bewildered. Sienna looked as if she had been slapped. She looked from Dominic to me and back to him. Her jaw tightened. "Fine. I'll see you at the office tomorrow." She turned and briskly walked out, the sound of her heels echoing furiously until the front door slammed. I was left alone with Dominic. The air in the conservatory felt thick, suddenly suffocating. I expected him to yell at me for upsetting Sienna, to accuse me again of playing mind games. Instead, he slowly walked toward me, invading my personal space until I was backed up against the edge of the tea table. He looked down at me, his chest rising and falling heavily. "You're giving me to her?" he asked, his voice a low, lethal murmur. Like I'm some sort of stray dog you found on the street and decided you don't want to keep anymore? I'm trying to give you your life back, I stammered, genuinely terrified by the dark possessiveness swimming in his eyes. This was the man who supposedly hated me. Why was he looking at me like he wanted to devour me? Dominic reached up, his long fingers gently but firmly gripping my chin, forcing me to look up into his furious eyes. "You forced your way into my life, Chloe," he whispered, his thumb brushing against the edge of my jaw. "You tied our blood, our money, and our names together in a knot so tight it chokes me. Do not presume to think you can just hand me over to someone else. If I am going to suffer in this cage you built, you are going to stay in it and suffer with me." The days that followed Sienna's disastrous visit were suffocating. The sprawling Harrison estate felt less like a home and more like a beautifully curated mausoleum. Dominic and I existed in a state of tense, unspoken warfare. He watched me with a dark, predatory vigilance, as if waiting for my amnesia to crack and the old, cruel Chloe to emerge with a triumphant laugh. But there was no laugh. There was only a desperate, gnawing need to undo the damage I had caused. On a rainy Tuesday morning, when I knew Dominic was locked in a board meeting at his downtown headquarters, I summoned Oliver Finch to the house. My father's corporate lawyer arrived, looking exactly as a man who traded souls for a living should, sharp, graying, and completely devoid of warmth. We sat in the cavernous formal dining room, the heavy oak table stretching between us like a battlefield. "I need to understand the exact mechanics of the merger, Oliver," I said, bypassing any polite small talk. I slid a cup of black coffee toward him. Specifically, the leverage my father holds over Dominic's company, Harrison Tech, and his sister's medical trust. Oliver adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses, a condescending smirk playing on his thin lips. "Chloe, darling, you know perfectly well how it works. You designed half of it." My stomach rolled. "Humor my brain injury, Oliver. Explain it to me like I'm a stranger." He sighed, leaning back in his chair. "Fine. Arthur Sterling bought up 80% of Harrison Tech's outstanding debt when they were on the verge of bankruptcy. In exchange for not calling in the loans and crushing the company, Dominic agreed to marry you. The stipulations are ironclad. If Dominic initiates a divorce or engages in infidelity, the debt is called in immediately. Harrison Tech is liquidated, and the Harrison Family Trust, which pays for young Clara's experimental leukemia treatments, is dissolved. I closed my eyes, a wave of pure self-hatred washing over me. And if I initiate the divorce? "Ah," Oliver chuckled dryly, "that was your father's little masterpiece. If you file for divorce, the debt is still called in, but the intellectual property Dominic's proprietary algorithms transfers directly to Sterling Enterprises. Dominic loses his company, his life's work, and his sister's lifeline. He walks away with absolutely nothing. I was paralyzed by the sheer malice of it. It wasn't just a cage, it was an execution chamber with a delayed trigger. There has to be a way out, a loophole." Oliver's smirk vanished, replaced by a cold, hard stare. "Why are you looking for a loophole, Chloe? Your father called me this morning. He's concerned that this amnesia is making you soft. He wanted me to remind you that you hold the leash. You don't hand the dog the keys to the collar. Get out," I whispered, my hands trembling as I gripped the edge of the table. "Get out of my house, Oliver." After he left, I retreated to the library, pulling every financial document, every contract, and every bank statement I could find. I spread them across the Persian rug, sitting cross-legged in the center of the chaos. Hours bled into the evening. There had to be a way to transfer my personal wealth, to pay off the debt anonymously, or a way to sign over the intellectual property rights directly to Dominic before a divorce was filed. "What are you doing?" The voice, deep and laced with irritation, shattered the silence. I gasped, my head snapping up. Dominic stood in the doorway, the harsh hallway light casting him in a sharp silhouette. He had discarded his suit jacket, his tie hanging loosely around his neck, the top buttons of his shirt undone. He looked exhausted, but as his eyes swept over the sea of documents surrounding me, a familiar, dangerous anger ignited in his gaze. "I'm looking for a way out," I said, my voice hoarse. I scrambled to gather the papers, suddenly feeling exposed. "For you. Oliver Finch was here today." He explained the reversion clause. "I-buyer. I didn't realize how deeply we had buried you." Dominic stepped into the room, his jaw clenching. He didn't look relieved, he looked furious. "I told you to stop playing these games, Chloe." "It's not a game," I pleaded, clutching a stack of contracts to my chest. "I'm trying to find a legal precedent to sever the debt without triggering the liquidation. If I can transfer my private trust to the Harrison Holding Company." "Stop it," Dominic roared, crossing the room in 3 massive strides. He dropped to his knees right in front of me, his hands slamming down on the papers scattered between us. "Do you think I haven't spent the last 2 years looking for a way out? Do you think I haven't hired the best lawyers in the country to find a crack in Arthur Sterling's armor? There is no way out." "There has to be," I insisted, tears of frustration finally spilling over my lashes. "I won't let my father destroy you. I won't let him hurt Clara." At the mention of his sister's name, Dominic froze. The anger in his face fractured, revealing a raw, bleeding vulnerability beneath the ice. He stared at me, his chest heaving, his eyes searching mine for the cruel punchline. "Why are you doing this?" he whispered, the sound jagged and broken. He reached out, his large, warm hand suddenly gripping my wrist. It wasn't a violent touch, but it was an inescapable one. "You spent months threatening to cut off Clara's treatments every time I was late for dinner, every time I looked at Sienna for a second too long. Why are you suddenly pretending to care?" "Because the woman who did those things is dead?" I sobbed, unable to hold back the torrent of guilt anymore. "She died in that car crash, Dominic. I am left with her ghosts, and I can't live with them. I can't live knowing I own another human being." Dominic's grip on my wrist tightened marginally. The distance between us was practically non-existent. I could feel the heat radiating from his body, the erratic rhythm of his breathing. His eyes, usually cold and detached, dropped to my trembling lips, a profound, agonizing confusion warring in his expression. For a terrifying, heart-stopping second, I thought he was going to kiss me. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife, a bizarre mixture of hatred, resentment, and a dark, twisted magnetism. Instead, he let go of my wrist, as if he had been burned. He stood up abruptly, turning his back to me. "Put the papers away, Chloe," he commanded, his voice devoid of emotion once more. "We have the Sterling Foundation Gala tomorrow night. Your father expects us to make a public appearance. You need to play the part of the devoted wife. That is what you bought, after all." The Sterling Foundation Gala was held in the grand ballroom of the Pierre Hotel, a suffocating display of exorbitant wealth and superficial philanthropy. Beatrice had laid out my dress for the evening, a stunning, floor-length gown in deep emerald silk that clung to every curve, paired with an obscenely large diamond necklace that felt heavier than a chain. As Thomas drove us into the city, the silence in the back seat of the Maybach was deafening. Dominic stared out the window, his jaw set in a rigid line. He wore a classic black tuxedo that made him look impossibly handsome, commanding the space around him with effortless authority. "What do I need to know?" I asked quietly, breaking the silence as the glowing lights of the hotel came into view. Dominic didn't turn his head. "Smile, don't speak to the press, and when your father is looking, pretend you don't find the sight of me repulsive." "I don't find you repulsive, Dominic," I said softly. He finally looked at me, a bitter smirk twisting his lips. "Right, you just find what you did to me repulsive. The distinction is lost on me." As the car pulled to a stop, the flash of paparazzi cameras instantly blinded me. Panic seized my throat. I couldn't remember how to do this. I didn't know these people, these rules, this life. Before I could spiral, Dominic's hand enveloped mine. His grip was firm, anchoring me to reality. "Breathe," he muttered under his breath as the door was opened by a valet. "Just follow my lead." Stepping onto the red carpet, a bizarre transformation occurred. Dominic slipped his arm around my waist, pulling me flush against his side. The stiff, resentful captive vanished, replaced by a man who looked fiercely protective and deeply in love. He smiled for the cameras, whispering meaningless, gentle words into my ear that made the photographers go wild, but sent a shiver of real electricity down my spine. It was a flawless performance. Inside the ballroom, the air was thick with expensive perfume and the low hum of power brokering. People I didn't know approached us, kissing my cheeks, asking about my terrible little accident. I smiled until my face ached, leaning heavily on Dominic, who navigated the shark-infested waters with an ease that shocked me. He never let go of my waist. Well, the miraculously recovered bride. The booming voice cut through the polite chatter like a thunderclap. The crowd parted, and Arthur Sterling approached. Even without my memories, my body recognized him. A cold sweat broke out on the back of my neck, and my stomach plummeted. My father was a large, imposing man with ruthless, calculating blue eyes that missed absolutely nothing. "Arthur," Dominic said, his voice perfectly neutral, though I felt the muscles in his side instantly go rigid beneath his tuxedo jacket. "Dominic," my father replied smoothly, before turning his piercing gaze onto me. He didn't hug me. He didn't ask how my head was. He simply looked me up and down like a piece of property he was inspecting for damage. "You look well, Chloe. The doctors said you lost your memory. I assume you haven't forgotten who signs the checks?" "I know who you are, Father," I said, trying to keep my voice from shaking. Arthur's eyes narrowed slightly. He took a step closer, lowering his voice so only the three of us could hear. "Good. Because Oliver Finch tells me you've been asking very foolish questions about the Harrison Trust. Let me make something abundantly clear to you, my dear. You threw a childish temper tantrum on the Pacific Coast Highway because your husband was looking at his little secretary. That little joyride cost me a small fortune in PR spin." "It wasn't a temper tantrum," Dominic interjected smoothly, his grip on my waist tightening. "The roads were slick. It was an accident, Arthur." My father let out a dark, raspy chuckle, looking directly at Dominic. "Was it?" Because from where I'm sitting, my daughter was starting to show signs of weakness before she wrapped her car around that guardrail. She was talking about renegotiating the merger, talking about letting you off the hook. I had to remind her of the stakes. My blood ran completely cold. The room seemed to spin. I looked at my father, the monster who raised me, and a horrific realization dawned on me. I hadn't crashed the car in a jealous rage over Sienna. The diary entries, they had been frantic, paranoid. But the later ones, the ones I had skimmed, they weren't just about jealousy, they were about guilt. Old Chloe had been starting to crack. She had been trying to find a way to fix it, just like I was now. And my father had found out. "Are you implying you had something to do with her brakes failing, Arthur?" Dominic's voice dropped an octave, losing all its performative warmth. The air around him turned distinctly lethal. He stepped slightly in front of me, shielding my body with his own. Arthur smiled, a chilling, dead-eyed expression. "I'm implying that actions have consequences, Dominic. Chloe is my flesh and blood, but Sterling Enterprises is my legacy. I won't let a lovesick little girl dismantle an acquisition worth billions. Keep your wife in line, Harrison, or next time the guardrail might not hold." With a final, dismissive pat on Dominic's shoulder, Arthur turned and melted back into the crowd of sycophants. I stood paralyzed, the breath knocked out of my lungs. My father had tried to kill me. Suddenly, Dominic's hand was gripping my elbow. "We're leaving," he growled. He didn't wait for my response. He pulled me through the crowd, ignoring the confused stares and the flashing cameras outside, practically shoving me into the back seat of the waiting Maybach before climbing in beside me. "Drive, Thomas," Dominic barked. The privacy partition slid up, sealing us in the dimly lit cabin. I was shaking uncontrollably, the diamond necklace feeling like a noose. I pressed my hands over my face, trying to hold back the sob that was tearing its way up my throat. "Hey." Dominic's voice was uncharacteristically soft. I felt the warmth of his hands gently pull my wrists away from my face. I looked up at him, the tears freely falling down my cheeks. He wasn't looking at me with hatred. He was looking at me with a profound, terrifying intensity. The walls he had built were crumbling, right there in the back of the car. He tampered with my car. I choked out, the reality crushing me. My own father. Dominic's jaw clenched tightly. He reached up, his thumb slowly wiping a tear from my cheekbone. His touch sent a violent jolt straight to my heart. "I won't let him touch you," Dominic whispered, the words fierce and completely involuntary. "Do you hear me, Chloe? He thinks he owns me, and he thinks he owns you, but he doesn't know what I'm willing to burn down to prove him wrong." Rain began to batter the tinted windows of the Maybach, mirroring the turbulent storm raging inside my chest. The drive back to the Hollywood Hills was a blur of neon city lights and suffocating silence. Dominic hadn't let go of my hand. His long, calloused fingers were wrapped tightly around mine, a silent anchor in a world that had just terrifyingly tightened on its axis. When Thomas finally pulled through the massive iron gates of the estate, I was trembling so violently my teeth chattered. The man I had called my father for 26 years had orchestrated my near-fatal accident. He had looked me in the eye and essentially promised to finish the job if I stepped out of line. Dominic didn't wait for Thomas to open the door. He shoved it open himself, pulling me out into the downpour. He draped his heavy tuxedo jacket over my bare shoulders, shielding me from the cold, and practically carried me up the marble steps into the foyer. Beatrice rushed forward, her eyes wide with alarm at our early return and drenched state. "Mr. Harrison? Mrs. Harrison? My word, what happened? Take the rest of the night off." "Beatrice," Dominic ordered, his voice echoing with a dark, undisputed authority. "Retire to your quarters. Do not come out until morning." Beatrice didn't ask questions. She took one look at Dominic's murderous expression, nodded swiftly, and disappeared down the hall. Dominic guided me up the sweeping staircase, past the master suite I had been occupying, and straight toward the east wing, his territory. He pushed open the heavy mahogany doors of his private suite, a place I had apparently never been permitted to enter. It didn't look like a bedroom. It looked like a war room. Multiple computer monitors bathed the dark room in an eerie blue glow. Stacks of servers hummed quietly in the corner. Whiteboards covered the walls, filled with complex algorithms, financial flowcharts, and corporate structures. This wasn't the room of a defeated man. This was the sanctuary of a man plotting a revolution. Dominic guided me to a plush leather armchair, gently pushing me down into it. He knelt in front of me, his hands resting on the armrests, caging me in. The tuxedo shirt clung to his broad chest, damp from the rain, and his stormy gray eyes were locked onto mine with an intensity that made my breath hitch. "Listen to me very carefully, Chloe," he said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. "I need to know exactly what you remember about the Sterling Enterprises mainframe. Anything. A password, a backdoor, a server location. Think." I squeezed my eyes shut, pressing my palms to my throbbing temples. I don't remember anything, Dominic. It's just a black void. All I know is what I read in my journals and the financial documents I found in the library." I opened my eyes, fresh tears spilling over my lashes. "I'm so sorry. I'm useless." "You are not useless," he countered fiercely, his thumb coming up to wipe away a stray tear. The tenderness of the gesture, contrasting with his lethal aura, made my heart hammer against my ribs. "You are Arthur Sterling's only blind spot." He stood up, pacing in front of the glowing monitors. "For 2 years, I've been building a shadow ledger, a decentralized financial network completely invisible to your father's auditors. I've been slowly siphoning Harrison Tech's proprietary algorithms, the very things your father wants to steal into this encrypted vault. My CTO, Wyatt Kensington, has been running interference from the inside. I stared at him, all warring with terror. So you have a way out? I have a lifeboat, Dominic corrected, running a hand through his damp, dark hair. But it's useless unless I can cut the anchor. If I initiate the transfer now, Arthur's automated tripwires will alert Oliver Finch in seconds. They will liquidate the medical trust before Clara's morning chemotherapy session. To bypass the tripwires, I need Arthur's master encryption key. It's a localized biometric drive. It never leaves his private vault at the Sterling Tower. The reality of the situation crashed over me. Arthur had me cornered. He had Dominic cornered. And the only way out was through the belly of the beast. I can get it, I whispered into the quiet hum of the servers. Dominic stopped pacing. He turned slowly, staring at me as if I had just spoken in tongues. What did you say? I stood up, the heavy silk of my emerald gown pooling around my feet. The fear that had been paralyzing me suddenly solidified into a cold, sharp resolve. This was my karma. I had built this cage for Dominic. It was my absolute responsibility to break it open. I can get the key, I repeated, my voice steadying. Arthur thinks I'm terrified of him. He thinks he put me in my place tonight. He expects me to come crawling into his office tomorrow, begging for forgiveness and promising to be his ruthless, obedient daughter again. No. Dominic crossed the room in 2 strides, his hands gripping my shoulders. His touch was branding, possessive. Absolutely not. Do you understand what that man is capable of? He cut your brakes, Chloe. He will kill you if he catches you. He won't catch me, I insisted, looking up into his desperate eyes. I am his flesh and blood. I am the only person who can walk into the executive suite without a security escort. I know the layout of the building. I found the blueprints in my office files today. I can do this. I am not letting you walk into a death trap, he growled, pulling me flush against his chest. The contact sent a shockwave through my entire nervous system. I could feel the erratic pounding of his heart against my own. I looked up at him, my breath catching in my throat. The hatred that had once defined his gaze was completely gone, replaced by a fierce, undeniable terror of losing me. Dominic, I breathed, reaching up to rest my hand flat against his chest. You spent 2 years sacrificing everything for your sister. Let me sacrifice something for you. Let me prove that the monster who forced you to the altar died in that crash. Please. He stared down at me, the tension in his jaw jumping. For a long, agonizing moment, he didn't move. Then, slowly, agonizingly, he lowered his head. His forehead rested against mine, our breaths mingling in the charged air between us. If he hurts you, Dominic whispered, his voice vibrating with a dark, lethal promise, I will burn Sterling Enterprises to the ground with him inside it. Morning broke over Los Angeles with a deceptive, golden warmth. I sat in the back of my father's town car, which I had specifically requested to maintain the illusion of submission, staring at the towering glass monolith of Sterling Enterprises. Before I left the house, Wyatt Kensington had paid a covert visit to the estate. He was a brilliant, nervous man who smelled faintly of energy drinks and panic. He had handed me a custom-built, sleek black USB drive. It's a mirroring program, Wyatt had explained, adjusting his glasses frantically. You don't need to steal the physical key. Just plug this into his terminal, and it will clone the biometric hash within 60 seconds. But Mrs. Harrison, if the firewall detects an anomaly, it will lock down the executive floor. You'll be trapped. I clutched my designer purse tightly, feeling the cold, hard edges of the USB drive through the leather. Walking into the lobby of Sterling Enterprises felt like stepping into an alternate reality. Security guards nodded respectfully. Executives parted like the Red Sea, whispering my name. Chloe Sterling, the Ice Queen, has returned. I kept my chin high, my face locked in a mask of haughty indifference, projecting a confidence I absolutely did not feel. I bypassed my old office and headed straight for the top floor Arthur's domain. As the elevator doors slid open, I was greeted by the sterile, intimidating expanse of the executive suite. There was only one obstacle between me and my father's private vault, Oliver Finch. The lawyer was sitting at a massive reception desk, sipping an espresso. When he saw me, his thin lips curved into a smug, victorious smile. "Chloe," Oliver purred, standing up. "Your father wasn't expecting you so early. I assume you've come to your senses after last night's little reminder?" "I have," I said smoothly, forcing a cold, imperious tone into my voice. My father was right. I was letting sentimentality cloud my judgment regarding the Harrison assets. I need to speak with him immediately to discuss tightening the leash on Dominic. Oliver's eyes gleamed with cruel satisfaction. "Excellent. Unfortunately, Arthur is currently in a closed-door teleconference with the Tokyo investors. He'll be another 20 minutes. You can wait in his private office." It was almost too easy. "Thank you, Oliver," I said, sweeping past him without a second glance. My father's office was massive, overlooking the sprawling metropolis. It was decorated in dark woods and heavy leather, a monument to his suffocating power. I didn't waste a second. I locked the heavy oak doors behind me and rushed to the sleek obsidian desk in the center of the room. Arthur's private terminal was recessed into the wood. I pulled the black USB drive from my purse with trembling hands and shoved it into the hidden port beneath the console. Instantly, a small LED light on the drive blinked red, then turned a steady, pulsing blue. The cloning had begun. 59 seconds. I stared at the pulsing light, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. Every creak of the building, every distant wail of a siren on the streets below sounded like a gunshot. 40 seconds. Come on, come on. I glanced at the door. I could hear the faint murmur of Oliver's voice from the reception area. If Arthur finished his call early, if Oliver decided to check on me. 20 seconds. Suddenly, the handle of the heavy oak door rattled. My blood turned to ice. "Chloe?" It was Oliver's voice, muffled through the thick wood. "The door seems to be locked. Is everything all right in there?" Panic surged up my throat, acidic and choking. "Fine," I called out, forcing my voice to sound annoyed rather than terrified. "Just fixing my makeup, Oliver. Give me a moment." "Your father just finished his call," Oliver replied, the sound of a key sliding into the lock echoing like a death knell. "He's coming down the hall now." 10 seconds. I stared at the drive. The light was still blue. It wasn't finished. The lock clicked. The door handle began to turn. 5 seconds. 4. 3. 2. The LED light flashed green. I yanked the drive out of the port just as the heavy doors swung open. I spun around, leaning back against the desk, crossing my arms over my chest, and casually dropping the drive into the deep pocket of my slacks. Arthur Sterling stepped into the room, flanked by Oliver. My father looked at me, his cold blue eyes sweeping over my relaxed posture. "Chloe," Arthur said, his voice a low, threatening rumble. "Oliver tells me you've come to your senses. I hope for your sake that is the truth." "It is," I lied flawlessly, channeling every ounce of the vicious woman I used to be. I pushed off the desk, walking toward him with a dark, calculated smile. "Dominic is a liability, Father. He thinks he can outsmart us. I came to tell you to authorize the liquidation of his sister's trust. Let's remind my husband exactly who owns him." Arthur's eyes widened slightly, a genuine spark of impressed malice lighting up his face. He let out a dark, booming laugh. "There is my daughter. Welcome back from the dead, Chloe." I smiled back, the USB drive burning a hole in my pocket. "You have no idea." 15 minutes later, I walked out of the towering glass building and climbed into the waiting town car. The moment the doors sealed shut, I pulled out my phone. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely type. I hit the speed dial for Dominic's encrypted line. He answered on the first ring. "Chloe, talk to me." "I have it," I breathed, tears of sheer adrenaline and relief spilling down my cheeks. I have the clone. The biometric hash is secure. A heavy, shuddering exhale came through the speaker. It was the sound of a man who had just had a 2-ton weight lifted off his chest. "Get home," Dominic commanded, his voice thick with an emotion I had never heard from him before. "Wyatt is ready to initiate the transfer. Get back to me, Chloe." "I'm on my way," I whispered. As the car pulled away from the curb, I looked back at the towering Sterling building. The empire was about to fall, and for the first time since waking up in that hospital bed, I finally felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. The drive back to the Hollywood Hills felt like a suspended breath. My heart hammered against my ribs, matching the frantic rhythm of the windshield wipers, slashing away the lingering rain. When Thomas finally pulled the Maybach up to the front steps of the estate, I didn't wait for him to open the door. I threw it open, kicking off my heels to sprint barefoot across the slippery marble of the foyer. "Dominic!" I screamed, the sound echoing through the cavernous house. He was already at the top of the stairs. He looked wild, his tie completely discarded, his shirt sleeves rolled up to reveal tense, corded forearms. When his eyes locked onto mine, a wave of profound, crashing relief washed over his sharp features. He didn't ask if I was okay. He took the stairs 2 at a time, grabbing my waist and pulling me flush against him. For a split second, he buried his face in my neck, inhaling sharply, as if checking to make sure I was truly real and breathing. "I have it," I gasped, pulling the black USB drive from my pocket. "You're insane," he murmured fiercely against my skin before grabbing my hand and pulling me toward the east wing. "And you are magnificent. Wyatt, she has the hash." We burst into the server room. Wyatt Kensington practically leaped out of his rolling chair, his fingers trembling as he snatched the drive from my hand. He jammed it into the primary decryption port of his rig. "Okay," Wyatt muttered, his eyes darting across 3 different monitors as lines of green code began to cascade down the black screens, bypassing the Sterling localized firewall. Injecting the cloned biometric data. Authenticating. The room fell dead silent, save for the hum of the servers. Authentication successful. "We're in," Wyatt breathed, a manic grin spreading across his face. "I have full backdoor access to Arthur's master ledger. I'm initiating the Shadow Protocol now." Dominic stepped up behind Wyatt, his broad shoulders practically vibrating with tension. "Reroute the proprietary IP first. Send it directly to the offshore holding accounts at the Aegis Geneva Trust. Arthur can't touch Swiss financial sovereignty. Once the algorithms are secure, detach the Harrison debt from Clara's medical trust and dissolve the merger penalty clause." "Routing IP now," Wyatt said, his fingers flying across the keyboard in a blur. A progress bar appeared on the center screen. 10%. 25%, 40%. "It's working," I whispered, stepping closer to Dominic. But karma, I was quickly learning, rarely comes without a final, bloody fight. Suddenly, a massive red warning panel flashed across Wyatt's secondary monitor. An aggressive, blaring siren erupted from the computer speakers. "What is that?" Dominic snapped, his jaw tightening. Wyatt's face went chalk white. Arthur just logged into his terminal in the executive suite. He sees the data drain. He's overriding the system manually. He's initiating a hard freeze on all outgoing assets. 65%. 70%. The progress bar began to stutter, slowing down to a painful crawl. "Push it through, Wyatt," Dominic roared. "I'm trying." But he's dispatching his private security. He's tracking the IP address of the data siphon. He knows it's coming from this house. Downstairs, the heavy crash of shattered glass echoed from the conservatory. My blood turned to ice. Arthur hadn't just logged in. He had sent his fixers to ensure I didn't make it out of the house with the clone. "They're here," I choked out, stepping backward. Dominic didn't hesitate. He pulled a heavy titanium deadbolt across the server room doors, locking us inside. He turned to me, his gray eyes blazing with a dangerous, protective fury. "Stand behind me, Chloe. Do not move." "Dominic, the transfer!" Wyatt yelled, panic elevating his voice to a shriek. "It's stalled at 89%. Arthur has triggered a total liquidation of Clara's trust to stop the bleed. If I don't sever his access in the next 30 seconds, he's going to drain her account and take the algorithms with it." Heavy footsteps thundered up the sweeping staircase outside. Fists began to pound violently against the mahogany doors of the server room. "Open the door, Harrison!" A muffled, gruff voice barked from the hallway. "Arthur Sterling wants his property back." Dominic stood directly in front of me, a heavy bronze bookend gripped tightly in his hand, ready to kill anyone who breached that door. "Wyatt, 30 seconds. Burn his bridge." "I have to crash the entire Sterling mainframe to do it," Wyatt yelled back, sweat pouring down his forehead. "It'll wipe Arthur's entire domestic corporate registry." "Do it," I screamed, the old, ruthless Chloe bleeding into my voice. "Burn his empire to the ground, Wyatt. Hit the button." Wyatt slammed his palm onto the enter key. The screens flashed violently. The progress bar jumped from 89% to 100%. Transfer complete. Connection terminated. At that exact second, Dominic's cell phone buzzed in his pocket. He didn't take his eyes off the rattling door as he pulled it out and put it on speaker. "True, you insolent, thieving bastard!" Arthur Sterling's voice roared through the small speaker, vibrating with a rage so profound it sounded demonic. "I will have you gutted. I will have you both thrown in a federal penitentiary." Dominic smiled. It was a dark, terrifying, utterly victorious smile. "Check your ledger, Arthur," Dominic said, his voice a low, lethal purr. "Harrison Tech is gone. The IP is gone. My sister's trust is fully endowed and shielded behind Swiss banking laws. And your domestic registry? It looks like your system just suffered a catastrophic, localized failure. You have no leverage. You have no company. You have nothing." "I have the security footage of my daughter stealing my encryption key," Arthur screamed. "I will press charges." "Do that." I stepped forward, speaking directly into the phone, my voice steady and venomous. "And I will hand over the telemetry data from my crashed car to the FBI, along with an audio recording of you implicitly confessing to tampering with my brakes at the gala. It's over, Father. The underdog just bit back. Do not ever contact us again." Dominic ended the call. The pounding on the door abruptly stopped. Through the window, we watched 3 black SUVs speed away from the estate, retreating into the night. Arthur had called off his dogs. He knew he had lost. The aftermath of an empire falling is surprisingly quiet. 2 days later, the financial news networks were in a frenzy. Sterling Enterprises was hemorrhaging stock value after a massive internal data corruption was leaked to the press. Meanwhile, Harrison Tech announced its complete independence, unveiling a groundbreaking new algorithm that sent its valuation skyrocketing. Clara's medical treatments were fully secured for the rest of her life. The hard karma had been delivered. The villain had been overthrown, which meant my job was done. I stood in the massive walk-in closet of the master suite, carefully folding the few simple sweaters and jeans I had bought for myself since waking up from the coma. I left the emerald gown, the diamonds, and the designer bags exactly where I found them. They belonged to a ghost. I zipped up my single duffel bag, my chest aching with a hollow, crushing weight. I had done the right thing. I had freed him. So why did it feel like I was walking to my own execution? I carried the bag downstairs. The house was quiet. Beatrice was in the kitchen, and Wyatt had long since returned to his own lab. Dominic was standing in the foyer, staring out the massive glass windows at the sprawling city below. He wore a simple black t-shirt and dark jeans, looking relaxed and devastatingly handsome without the weight of my father's blackmail resting on his shoulders. He turned as he heard my footsteps. His eyes immediately dropped to the duffel bag in my hand, and the relaxed posture vanished. His jaw tightened. "What is that?" he asked, his voice low and dangerously quiet. "It's my bag," I said, forcing a small, fragile smile. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a freshly printed manila envelope, and these are the new divorce papers. Oliver Finch was formally dismissed yesterday, and Arthur has no legal standing to enforce the liquidation clause anymore. These are clean. You keep everything. I take nothing. I held the envelope out to him. "You're free, Dominic. The cage is officially broken." He didn't take the envelope. He stared at it, and then his stormy gray eyes snapped up to meet mine. "Where are you going?" "I don't know yet," I admitted honestly, a tear betraying me and slipping down my cheek. "But I can't stay here. I can't look at you every day and be reminded of the monster I used to be. You deserve to be happy. You deserve to go find Sienna, or whoever you want, and build a life that isn't tainted by a Sterling." Dominic stepped forward, entirely ignoring the divorce papers in my outstretched hand. He closed the distance between us, his presence overwhelmingly magnetic. "Sienna tendered her resignation yesterday," he said softly, his eyes searching my face. I blinked, confused. "What? Why?" "Because she realized what I realized the night of the gala," Dominic murmured, reaching out to gently take the duffel bag from my grip and drop it onto the marble floor. "She realized that I don't look at her the way I look at you." My breath hitched. "Dominic, you don't mean that. You hated me." "I hated the woman who built the cage," he corrected, his hands coming up to cup my face. His thumbs gently stroked my cheekbones, his touch sending a blazing fire through my veins. "But that woman died on the Pacific Coast Highway. The woman standing in front of me risked her life to walk into a lion's den to save a sister she doesn't even remember. The woman standing in front of me burned down her own empire just to set me free." He leaned in, his forehead resting against mine. I could feel the heat radiating from him, the absolute certainty in his erratic heartbeat. "The cage is broken, Chloe," he whispered, his lips brushing against mine with every agonizingly slow word. "But I don't want to leave. I want to stay. With you." A sob broke from my throat as I reached up, my hands tangling in his dark hair. When he finally kissed me, it wasn't the bitter, resentful submission of a captive. It was a claiming. It was a fierce, passionate, desperately hungry kiss that tasted like rain, cedarwood, and absolute freedom. I kissed him back with everything I had, pouring all my apologies, all my hope, and all my newly discovered love into him. The villain of the story had been destroyed, but from her ashes, I finally got to be the hero of my own life. Karma has a funny way of balancing the scales. 6 months later, Arthur Sterling was indicted on federal charges of corporate espionage and reckless endangerment, his empire crumbling under the weight of his own arrogance. He thought he could play God with our lives, but he underestimated the power of a woman with nothing left to lose. Dominic and I didn't just survive the storm. We built a new legacy from the wreckage. True love isn't about possession or blackmail. It's about tearing down the walls and choosing each other every single day in the beautiful, chaotic freedom of the aftermath.